Hello and welcome to the Next in Line podcast, where we are helping to prepare you for whatever is next in line. As always, I am your host, Chance Pitts, and I would like to thank you for tuning into this episode. Guys and gals, welcome into another exciting interview episode with the one and only Dan Gilliam. We're also joined by my dad, Mr. Billy Pitts, for some commentary as well. But before we dive into that episode, guys, and that awesome conversation we were able to have with Dan, I want to take care of the housekeeping. If you receive value from this episode or any other episode of the Next in Line podcast, I would ask that you share the show with like-minded individuals who could receive the same kind of value. That's the number one way for us to grow and to reach a larger audience and, in effect, help more people, guys. That's the number one thing that we're out here trying to do, is help as many people as possible see their full potential. Now, along with that, another way you can help us grow this platform and this movement is by leaving us a like, comment, subscription, rating, or review, or whatever other kind of interaction your platform lets you do. Now, if that's YouTube, you can comment, like, subscribe. Spotify and Apple Podcasts both have rating areas you can drop ratings. I think Apple Podcasts also has a review section as well. So if you're feeling generous, help us out there, guys. Help us reach that larger audience. Now, also, another housekeeping thing is we do have social media, guys. You can keep up with all the crazy stuff we have going on and reach out to us. Shoot us your questions, comments, and concerns to our DMs. Those platforms are Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, and the handle is at Next in Line Development on all three of those platforms. We'd be glad to hear from you there. We're glad to answer any questions and help out however we can. Now, guys, the last thing I want to do is run through a few announcements. We do have some running events coming up this year that I want to keep in front of everybody if you're interested in diving into that field. Ricochet's Riot is coming up on June 10th over in Killeen, Texas. We'll have a couple runners out there in the 50K, a couple in the 5K and the 10K, and maybe a couple more sprinkled in from the sounds of it. But again, that's June 10th. If you're thinking about doing that one or interested, reach out to us, let us know. We'll be happy to point you in the right direction, get out there and help you get through that race. Now, next, guys, we're going to have the Habanero 100 Relay. That's August 12th over in Cat Spring, Texas. We ran the 100-miler there last year, and we're returning for the relay with a few teams. There's two options on the relay. There's the 100K, which is a 62-mile total, and there's the 100-miler, which is going to be a total of, I think, 5-6 mile laps per person. That's a team of 4. You can cut that down to 4 laps each if you jump up the teammates to 5. So if you're thinking about doing that, guys, it's a little bit of a commitment, a lot of laps running out there and a lot of miles covered, but it breaks it down into small bite-sized pieces, and it'll be awesome to get some of y'all out there. We do have a few teams, like I said, getting ready to sign up for that thing, so reach out on any of the platforms of social media I previously mentioned if you want to get involved in that. Next, guys, the big event I have going on in my running schedule for this year is the KD 225 over in Clinton, Missouri on October 23rd. I'm super excited. I will actually be joined by a couple of people, including Dan Gilliam, the guy that we have about to tell y'all an awesome story about the Cocodona 250 and his life here in just a couple seconds. He'll be joining me out there running that race as well, so it'll be good to see him and his fiance out there on the course with us. Next, guys, we have, and lastly, I should say, the Brazos Bend 100 on December 2nd over in Needville, Texas. I don't know that I'll be running that race, but I'll be out there with a group of great people supporting Michael Ruiz as he takes that 100-miler on, and possibly 1 or 2 more people from our little group here at Next in Line. So super excited about that. Super excited to help him get across the finish line on his first 100-miler. And there's several different distances out there, guys, for anybody that wants to run one of those races as well. Out at Brazos Bend, I encourage you to sign up early because they do fill up pretty quick, but I think they have events all the way from the 5K up, and we'd be happy to help crew you through that or help you with encouragement or motivation or however we can do that, guys. But that pretty much rounds out the running events for today. Now let's dive into a little bit about Dan. We'll tell the story about how we met Dan, but it was very brief. This was kind of a wild commitment for us to go out and pace him for the Cocodona 250, the last 60 miles, I should say, or 70 miles or so. But It was an awesome experience, and you get to hear the full story. You heard the pacer side from me and my dad in the previous episode. However, we are getting to sit down with Dan and talk about that race from start to finish. We're going to break it out into two different episodes of part 1 and part 2 because we did get a little bit long-winded, but it's a great story with a ton of exciting things that happened within it, and big ups and downs, and just really, really interesting conversation that goes on about this great race. But not to mention the other things that we talk about in there as well, just Dan and the kind of guy he is and how he got to running these crazy length ultra marathons. But at one point, he weighed 280 pounds, guys. Now he's out here running these crazy races. And in his own words, at points in his life, he felt like life was going nowhere for him. And he was just kind of comfortably numb where he was in life, not pushing the envelope at all or striving for these big goals. And he had this depression about life, and he was just generally unhappy as hell, to quote his own words. So it's awesome to see him out there accomplishing huge things and making massive changes and motivating so many people and inspiring so many people out there on the trails. And like I said, guys, we'll have the privilege of running a race over at the Katy Trail 225 in Missouri this October. So very excited to share the trail. But guys, without any further ado, let's go ahead and dive into this episode with the one and only Dan Gilliam. Well, a big welcome into the podcast to Mr. Dan Gilliam. Just knocked out and completed the Cocodona 250 Ultra Marathon in Arizona. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you. Good to see you again.
Absolutely. It's been what, just over a week since you finished that thing up now?
Yep, on the 5th, so just a little over a week.
That's awesome. Joined also by my dad, Mr. Billy Pitts. He was out there helping pace, so we'll get him in there for some commentary as well on this. So welcome, Dad.
Glad to be here.
Sounds good. Well, guys, let's go ahead and dive right in. Dan, I really want to kind of get into just overall who you are, what you do, how you got into running these crazy races, just a little bit of history so people can kind of put 2 and 2 together as they hear this story of Cocodona.
All right, we'll dive right into the deep stuff right at the beginning.
There we go.
Just originally back in 2019, I was going through a lot in my life with marriage and just not being in a good place. And I had that summer, I had a black lab that got into some poison, some slug bait, and he ended up dying from it, ended up going into a stroke. And it just really made me think about like what I was doing with my life and my responsibilities and, who I was, and just questioning all kinds of stuff about myself. And it all started with a 5-mile hike. One day I was just like, I'm going to go see if I can walk 5 miles. And I hiked up the hill and, emotionally just went ahead and did 5 miles. And looking back at it now and the pain I had, I feel like I blew my Achilles out that day just doing 5-mile hike. And and then just started hiking and adding miles. And that year, I just challenged myself to I was like, I'm going to do 100 hikes this year. And then realized there's so much green space right here in the Bay Area. And I just started putting these hikes together and just going, 5, 6, 7 miles, whatever it was. And then I realized that on Instagram, there was a 52 hike challenge that everybody was doing. And I was like, oh man, I really overshot this. I'm trying to do 100 hikes, and how am I going to do that? Everybody else is doing 52 hikes. So I had a little bit of doubts, and I just kept going. And I remember ending in Lassen National Park with my 100th hike, and I put about 700 miles in that year. So averaging about 7 miles really on those hikes. And they ranged anywhere from 3 to, I think, 15, 18 miles at the most at that time. And those distances just seemed crazy at that time. And over the years, I started mountaineering, doing mountaineering stuff. I was backpacking a lot. I was going long distance backpacking. And I got up to a day hike of like 28 miles. And then I met Grace in 2021. and she said, "Hey, you want to go pace this guy in Moab?" And I barely knew her. I barely didn't know him at all. I never met Todd Flavin, and I was like, "Sure, I guess. What is it all about?" And I had no idea what we were getting ourselves into. Just kind of, I ended up pacing him 2 sections, about 50 miles, 2 separate sections, and just that whole year, I was like, I think I could do this. So I was just like, I built up from really nothing to where I'm at now. And backtracking a little bit, at the end of 2019, I was already in pretty good shape, but I took the decision to go ahead and get sober because my son was dealing with a lot of anger and depression and all kinds of just, teenage year stuff, 17, 18 years old. And I didn't know how to get the time off of work. So I was just like, I'm just going to go into an alcohol program and stop drinking. I'll better myself and I'll set a good example for him. And that's what I did. And it just everything just kind of erupted from that point on, of being sober, of just trying to be the best version of myself, really. And I just kept challenging myself with one thing after another. And that's where we're at today. I ended up doing Moab. Well, I started with Bigfoot last August, and really didn't have much experience at all, and went in there raw. Didn't think I needed a crew, didn't need no pacers. Grace was there, and she didn't really have too much of a clue. She did her best with massages and helping with my feet. She really didn't have any idea about taping feet at that time. We were pretty much just winging it, and I got into 180 into that race and could have finished it, but I didn't know what my body was capable of at that time. I didn't know that the pains that I was feeling were going to be permanent, or if I was going to, ever come back from that. Bigfoot was just, it was insane. And yeah, and then from there, went right into Moab, really with no training, because I was still hurting from Bigfoot. I was down from Bigfoot from what happened there, and I was just trying to protect the body and just go with the pace that I needed to go. And I stayed just ahead of the cutoff times, and I ended up finishing it, and dead last, but I finished it. So,
Hey, that's what matters, getting across the
and,
line, right?
and then where we're taking us to where we're at with Cocodona, I mean, I guess we could go ahead and fall into more questions with that. So we can fall into Cocodona and talk about where that's at now. And also fall
Absolutely.
back on those too.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, what's the first ultra marathon you did? What was that race? Was it Moab or I mean, Bigfoot?
Well, the first ultra I did, that was kind of a funny story too, because I really just did a half marathon in Auburn, and it was supposed to be a full marathon, and I dropped down to a half because I was having some pretty serious IT band issues, and I didn't really want to flare it up any worse. And then really in, when was it? It was June of last year. June of last year, there was an 18-hour endurance event in Ashland called the Tempest, I believe. And I looked it up, and it was small. There wasn't that many people there, and it was one of those just mental games. It was 1.1 miles around this park on pavement, on concrete, and a little bit of like tan bark as you walk through the park. And there was kids' baseball games and soccer games going on and all that. And when I looked it up, I told Grace, I was like, "Oh, look, we're up," because we were up north at my parents' house up by Mount Shasta, and I was like, "Look, there's an endurance event. I should do the 12 hours." And Grace says, "Just do the 18," and I did it and ended up doing 70 miles in 18 hours, and just beat my feet up. My feet were beat up. My toenails were tore up. I was in pretty bad shape, but I just toughed it out. It was something new, and mentally just got through that. And the interesting thing about that is I was still having the IT band issues, and during that race, it stopped, and I no longer had them after having them for 5 or 6 months, which it's a mystery of this sport. Of sometimes your injuries will dissipate when you least expect them, or in places you least expect them to.
No kidding.
Absolutely. I've had that happen myself.
Yeah. But they'll
Man,
also resurface new ones where they least expect them to too.
That too.
that's not the truth. Man, and then so moving forward from that, so 18-hour endurance challenge, doing around 70 miles there. Then going to Moab after linking up with Todd, after meeting Grace and everything, and then deciding just to kind of, it sounds like go all in and taking on a lot of these different races and challenges. It doesn't seem like you shied away from anything. So coming up on getting into Moab, I knew you'd ran a couple 100 milers in there as well. How did those prepare you getting ready for something like Moab? Was it kind of even something you were worried about going into? You knew you were going to be able to get it done, or were you?
Well, actually, Moab I did before the 100 mile. Yeah,
That's
so
right.
the timeline was I paced Todd without doing any, and then the endurance. My first endurance event was in Ashland in 2022, and then from there I just was doing training with the best I could and went right into Bigfoot. And Bigfoot was a beast. It was 40,000 plus feet of elevation gain, ups and downs across, Mount St. Helens volcanic area where it's just exposed, rocky and hot the first day, and then just gets into wooded areas, rivers, a lot of sand, and just a lot of elements that just tear you up. And I was thinking Washington was going to be cooler down in the trees, and it wasn't. It was humid. Everything was just kind of trapped in there. There was no breeze really, and it was definitely a challenging race. But
So what made you pick that race after doing the 18-hour endurance and then you go straight, I'm going to do a 200-mile race? Where did that come from?
well, the crazy part of that is I was on the Bigfoot wait list, and that was a race I really wanted to do because I've kind of, adopted the name with backpacking and on Instagram as Bigfooted Hiker or Bigfooted Ultra.
Yeah.
And I just had this, and plus I really love Washington. The state of Washington really just captured my eye with all the trees and stuff. And Bigfoot was on my list. It was the one I wanted to do. But I was on the wait list and I was like, well, I want to do one of them. So I got in Moab and I was already signed up for Moab. And then up pops this email on the wait list, like a couple months out from Bigfoot. You've been selected from the wait list. And I was like, well, we're just going to do two of them this year then. And it was almost really discouraging to DNF that. And at the times at Bigfoot, when I finally did, all the straws came together and just broke my back. Literally, just everything stacked against me. I was like, man, these people are crazy. These ultra runners are nuts. I'm never doing this crap again. Take me off of the Moab. I'm not doing nothing anymore. And then a couple of days rest, and I don't even think it was that. I think it was literally when I woke up the next morning, I was like, I'm doing this next year. I'm coming back and I'm doing it again.
That's awesome. No, that's really cool, man. And I do want to get in before we dive full into Cocodona. I want to talk a little bit about how we met because it sounds like your pacing adventure with Todd is right up the alley of how we all got together as well, going into Cocodona. Which for those of y'all that don't know, I ran Habanero 100 last year in Sealy, Cat Spring, Texas, over near Sealy. And Todd was out there, and that's how we connected with Todd. He went out there alone in his hiking boots, ran his to run that 100-mile race. And my crew kind of offered their hand to him and kind of adopted him, let him come under the tent, cooked some food for him and stuff. And through Todd, we were connected with Dan here. And then Dad ran his 100-mile race, the Rocky Raccoon 100, back in February. And Dan was out there running it as well. Both of them were able to knock out that race. And in the process, for about, not even a minute, I think, Dan, we
maybe that. And we all just happened to be there at the same time. Your dad and everybody was there when I came through, and I was thinking, how the heck am I going to find these guys? And I look over because I didn't even really know what you guys looked like completely. And I looked over and I was just like, oh, that's them right there. I know it is. I missed hundreds of people. I mean, Rocky Raccoon was a big event. There was a lot of people out there. And that one was actually my first 100 too. So,
Oh, that's awesome.
yeah.
Yeah, you came
Official.
down a little
I mean,
bit,
I've done 100, but
a little different format.
yeah.
No, but yeah, like you said, we just happened to catch each other on that loop and link up for literally 1 minute and have a conversation. And next thing I know, you shot us a message because we had connected on social media. You shot us a message and said, "Hey, would y'all be interested in coming to Pace for Cocodona?" And we, like I said, didn't really know you, but man, what an awesome decision to go out there, and it's been just spectacular, just how close we've gotten, and the experience as a whole. It's something that really is like nothing else I've ever been able to do. So, kind of a little cool story of how we all tied in together. But prior to all of us getting out there and pacing you for Cocodona, man, you had 190 miles on us by the time we linked up with you. So what I really want to do, and what we haven't been able to do yet, is dive into those first 190 miles of the race before we all got in there. And I want to just kind of relive some of that with you, see what it was like going through some of those tough sections, the ups and downs, the peaks, and just dive into your race as a whole, boss. So, I guess the best place to start is race day that morning. What time do you roll up to the starting line that morning?
No, I think we got there about 4:15, about 45 minutes before the race started, and just started stretching in the parking lot a little bit, and went over and picked up the tracker. And I've seen some other people roll in, got to see West Plate come in and rolled right up next to us and shake his hand a little bit. And I called him Mr. Cocodona, and I was trying to give him a compliment, and I'm assuming he took it that way. And I say that because he does a lot really for Cocodona with mapping and videos, and just an altogether great person himself, and his fiance or girlfriend or whatever she was. They're both just really good people. So as soon as he pulled up, I'm thinking, oh, it's going to be a good day. West Plate pulled up next to us. It's going to be good. The day before, got to meet Chad Wright, which was one of the people that I was looking forward to seeing out there, and that was just circumstance that he just had to pop up for the pre-race day before check-in, and got a picture with him, and he was good people just to talk to for a minute and see his story at Cocodona now and our story. And it's interesting how people's paths cross even for a brief period of time.
Absolutely. No, Chad's a cool guy. We've been fortunate enough to get some time with him as well, and experience just what the kind of person he is, right, and what they stand for with the 307 Project. And it's like you said, good people.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess moving into it as well, getting ready to toe the line for a 250-mile ultramarathon, especially after the experiences with Moab and the experience out of Bigfoot. Were you excited? Were you nervous? Were you kind of dreading the start? I know there's a heavy section in the beginning that's really hot, high elevation, all that good stuff.
Yeah, all those feelings were there. They were present. I acknowledged it, and I think I kind of just broke it down in my head enough times to know what my race strategy was and know what to expect. In a sense, I didn't obviously never been on the course. I didn't really have any clue what the course looked like. I imagined the bottom section being a bunch of cactuses and just open space, really, and that's exactly what it was. And for it went up quick. It was rocky, the jagged rocks the size of softballs that you kick into your ankles and stuff. And it was bottlenecked at first, but with any 200, that's going to happen. And there's 250 miles to go. So I was just real patient with that and trying to watch my effort pace on my watch and just not try to push myself too hard and get my heart rate up in the heat. And just really get to the first aid station where we were required to get 4 liters of water, or at least have the capacity for 4 liters of water. And just just really watch water consumption, watch the heart rate, take rest when I felt like I was, getting fatigued. Nutrition, I tried to stay on top of my nutrition in that section, but really it was just mainly about getting through to Crown King that first day in one piece, because I knew I had a lot of race ahead of me. And we came across, well, the water station, first one was at 8 miles. Oh, no, I guess that wasn't the water station. That was the check station. So there was a check station at Cottonwood that had actually moved up to 8 miles instead of 11, which was not a big deal, and just grabbed some nutrition there. And then the water station, I believe, I'm not exactly sure what mileage, what that was. And it was, they basically monitored and let you take a liter. There was a guy there, and he was just giving a liter of water out. There was also some other, don't know their name, but somebody let me use their filter, and I was able to filter out some water and add some additional water there. I just took my time there, cooled off, and changed my socks, and yeah, and then on to Lane Mountain. I don't particularly remember that aid station, and I think that's mainly because I was just looking forward to get to Crown King and see Grace for the first time, and get her to look at my feet, retape them, and do whatever. But my feet were relatively in pretty good shape. I was feeling pretty good at that time. Wasn't feeling too bad.
Absolutely. And I've heard a lot of people talk about that first section between the beginning of the race and Crown King, where it's just kind of pretty adverse conditions all the way around, right? Sun beating down on you. It's in the 90s, mid 90s, I think. A lot of elevation to climb up. And then, like you said, the softball sized rocks that were just kind of hard to navigate through, and had to worry about ankles and tweaking knees and all that good stuff. So I've heard that from a lot of people, just having to be very, very intentional with the effort that you put in through that first section was apparently a really, really big thing for that race. And then going up to Crown King, do you know kind of when you got up to that aid station? Was it in the afternoon, the evening on that first day, or?
I think it was in the evening. I think it was about 5 or 6. I estimated that it was going to take me about 12 hours to do that section. I pretty much maintained the 3 mile an hour pace right around there that I wanted to at the beginning. Didn't push myself too hard, which I was very happy with at that time, with considering the elevation gain and stuff. I was averaging, I think for my watch was 15, 16-minute miles at places, and I felt pretty good about that time. It was a section that took a lot of people out. I mean, we've seen a lot of people with heat exhaustion, people that didn't get the right amount of water, that multiple factors of being rushed or letting that adrenaline take over and pushing themselves a little hard, and before you know it, you're vomiting, not holding nothing, no water down, and having no food down. And at that point in that race, it's as hard as it is. That's pretty much it for most people. If you deal with some adversities like that, to where you can't get nutrition and you can't hold water down, that's not good.
So you were able to maintain, that was going to be one of my questions. You were able to maintain pretty good hydration and nutrition throughout that entire section. Came out of it feeling pretty good.
Yeah, I would say that was probably my best section, because I prepared for it and thought about it and kind of had a game plan for it. After that, it kind of was hit or miss, or not really downhill, but I mean, I think I did decent, but I definitely could have, still feel like I could have done better on the nutrition part of it. In between aid stations, but it's really easy for me to just eat a lot at aid stations, especially if they have good food. They'll ask me what I want, and I'll just tell them one of everything. And so sometimes they don't like giving it to me, but I'm like, I will eat it. Trust me.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember that from some of the later aid stations. That was pretty awesome to see, and they complied in those later spots in the race pretty well with giving you some food. And then coming out of Crown King, I mean, even we saw a lot of trouble from like guys that are very experienced with this race. I think Prestige struggled through that area and then got hung up a few probably an aid station or two later. I think he went out of the race pretty early, or went down pretty early with some issues. And I know McKnight, also the winner of the race, struggled as well through those early sections too. So it just shows you that you can't really predict what's going to happen or how, and you can really very quickly get yourself behind on one of those two things or both.
Yeah, or injuries with the rocks and just, banging, wear and tear on your back. And I know McKnight, I think, was having problems with his back and just his mental state at that time, which was pretty easy to do. I mean, you're early on in the race, and when things don't seem like they're going well early on in the race, you're probably asking yourself 100 times, how the heck am I going to do this? I'm 50 miles in or whatever it is, and I got 200 miles to go, and I'm already feeling like this. And I definitely hit that in there already, probably, I would say. In between mile 53, those two aid stations, and 63 at Camp Kippa, I was already thinking, like, how am I going to do this? And hearing that people had already gotten lost, some of the leaders had already, went off the course and got some extra miles in. And yeah, and then that just kind of leads up to where I picked up the Pacers and how much the Pacers really meant to my journey in Cocodona and stuff. But I mean, if you want to touch on a couple of those other aid stations in between there and Friendly, the only thing that really stands out to me is Camp Kippa was up there at pretty high elevation. There's still snow on the ground. It was windy. The dust was coming off those roads and just blasting everybody in the face, really. So we're taking on a lot of dust, cold air, and getting into Camp Kippa.
I'm sorry, is that where you could pick up your pacer at it?
No, Camp Kippa was the first pacer was Friendly, but I didn't pick up the pacer until Whiskey Row.
Okay.
So, but Camp Kippa was an indoor aid station, probably because it's up there and cold. And I remember walking there and kind of being out of it. It was at night. Yeah, I think pretty sure it was at night, or see, it could have been actually like first light, which was still at night. It's probably like 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
The sun comes up pretty early there, and it was cold. I was tired. The aid station was pretty warm, and I got in there and I was sitting on the couch and I was just kind of zoning out, thinking about sleeping, but I really just wanted to get down to Friendly and see Grace. Grace had been volunteering there. I just wanted to get there and see her and just kind of reset. And got down into Friendly, I believe it was around 9 or 10 a.m. And the plan was that I was going to sleep, but I had a pacer coming in from Stockton, California that drove 12 hours there. And he was waiting at Whiskey Row, and I just kind of wanted to get to Whiskey Row and evaluate stuff from Whiskey Row. So she taped me up, and on to Whiskey Row I went. It was only 8 more miles down and into the town of Prescott, and got into a little bit of pavement. I think there was about 3 miles of pavement that was not the best sight to see, and definitely was pretty slow going coming onto the pavement after all the uphills and then downhill. Because from Camp Kippa, it really dropped in elevation coming down into Prescott, and was still pretty rocky at times. And yeah, I just got to Whiskey Row and just kept continuing on. So, and it was Prescott's. It was a nice town. I mean, my particular opinion is it's real hard to get into these towns when you're in these ultra marathons and you go back to civilization where cars are driving and there's normal people functioning, their everyday lives. And it's not easy to do. I think for the crews, it's great because they can go visit these towns and get to see parts of Arizona that they probably wouldn't normally visit and stuff, and makes it accessible for people to rent hotels and have places to stay and all that. But as far as from a runner standpoint of it, or my opinion, that's one thing that I could have done without, is coming into towns.
Yeah.
Now, you said you got up to Camp Kip and you had some thoughts about I still got a long way to go, and all that stuff was kind of creeping in a little bit. But had the first part of the race really gone like you thought it was going to go, like you kind of predicted, because from the research you did?
It did, but I think what the one thing that I don't know if I mean I took it into account, but the one thing that got me was I felt like I was out there for a lot longer than I was. I think going into that second day, I was even seeing people for a second time sometimes and being like, "Oh, been a while since I've seen you," and they're like, "Yeah, last night," and I'm just like, "Damn, don't remind me of that." It's like it seems like it was last week sometimes. And I think
That's a long stretch to be on your own.
yeah, I think just that early with those aid stations and that distance, you start losing track of time, and it's obviously you just try to go from one aid station to the next. And I knew at that point all I needed was a break, of something positive in my favor, and I was looking forward to getting pacers and stuff, and that reset me. I think getting the pacer and Whiskey Row, I was still tired. I hadn't slept at that point, going into the second day, and yeah, Landon was great. He's a young kid, he's about 30 years old, and he was really good with navigation. And at the point where I just didn't really feel like looking at my phone, and he was navigating us out of Whiskey Row and by I don't know if it was a state park, but Watson Lake. And there's some pretty good scrambling around some rocks and different stuff like that in this park. And at night, I've heard that it's pretty challenging to find the path through there. And it wasn't bad during the day, but it was definitely some scrambling over some rocks. And then from there, we just got on a bike trail, and electric bikes zooming past us, and seeing a horny toad lizard, and just getting down this trail. Um, and then that takes us into Iron King, which was pretty much in an area where I imagine 3 years ago may not have been much of anything. They're all new houses. It's all new development. This is continuing to grow around this aid station, and it's literally right in the middle of this huge development of, I imagine most of it retirement homes or vacation homes or whatever, because they got the RV parking garages, and just nice houses. And being able to be with Landon, it was good. I was still tired at that point. I knew I had a big day ahead of me. There was no real sleep place at Iron King. And then we got from Iron King, it was only 6 more miles to Fane Ranch. And that was like the one that they all talked about, because they had the massage therapist there, and the boots that you put on that massage your legs and do whatever, all that stuff. And that was the halfway point, or not the halfway point. I guess that was 100-mile point. They 98 miles, but they had a finish line there, which I don't know was a good thing, because I joked around when I crossed it. It was like, oh, I'm dropping down to the 100-mile or I'm done. And it was kind of like one of those aid stations where you was thinking, man, they're trying to keep me here. They're playing the funk music and like the psychedelic stuff. Like, I feel like I was back in like the 70s or 60s or something, and it was just a weird vibe there. It was fun. They had good food there. I believe that was where they had some spaghetti, and they also had something that like a local chef was making these different things, and they did have some really good stuff there. I did get a massage there. I did use the boots. The massage felt good. I'm not sold on those boots. I feel like they they may be but some hype involved in that. But yeah, so Landon and I got out of there, out of Fane Ranch, and headed to Mingus. Let's see here. Try to backtrack. I don't know if at some point in there we went across a bunch of cattle fields, and I guess that was from Iron King to Fane Ranch. And then I think it was a little bit, oh yeah, it was both. And I think there was some more from Fane Ranch to Mingus. And that was basically just going across fields that had little cactuses hidden in it. The flags were in the grass. Another area that, for the most part, we went through during the day, and then the second half of it, before Mingus Mountain, it started getting dark and a little bit harder to navigate, and we basically were going down this fence line, barbed wire fence line, for miles, and we're going over wood and metal ladders that kind of cross over these properties, barbed wire fences, and trying to balance and get over those on tired legs. Some of them weren't balanced that great. Like a couple of them, I really made sure I had my weight centered on them, because one of them did a wheelie when I stepped on the step. And it was definitely some interesting times for sure. And at that point, I was struggling. I was tired, going into 48 hours of no sleep, and getting up to Mingus Mountain was steep. Landon, my friend, he started hitting a little wall himself, and he was trying to stay positive, but he was hurting. His quads were hurting, and he was questioning himself and me, like, how the heck do you do this? You know, this is this is crazy. And yeah, we got up to Mingus Mountain, and I was kind of in a bad. I would say that was probably where I was at my worst part in the race, is at Mingus Mountain. Coming in there, I'd text Grace, and I told her, I was like, if I don't get some sleep here, I'm dropping. I'm done. So I need to get some sleep. I was pretty grumpy. Got some food and got a little bit of sleep. Finally got a little bit of broken up sleep. I'd say maybe an hour altogether of some broken up sleep, trying to sleep there in the car at the aid station with people making noise and slamming doors and shining lights in the car and everything else. But yeah, so that's that. And at that point, we decided that Grace was going to pace me down, and my friend from Stockton was going to go ahead and go back. He felt like that was the best idea. He was pretty sore at that point.
Absolutely. Man, I heard, listening to Chad Wright's recap, he talked about Mingus like it was pretty tough out there. I want to say, did you hit that? I didn't catch it. Did you hit Mingus at daylight, or were you in the dark on Mingus? Because I think it was either him or somebody else hit it at dark, and it was pretty dang cold from what I understand.
I hit it at dark. It wasn't too cold. The night in that particular area, I don't remember it being that cold. I remember when I woke up, I was a little cold, but for the most part, it wasn't cold. I must have hit it it had to be around midnight, I guess, or something. Oh, well, it was I remember saying it was at 48 hours getting into 110 miles. So I think I was right around that 48-hour, 50-hour mark, and was just imagining, of being at mile 220, really at 100 hours. And I, thinking back on that, we probably weren't too far off from that, really. So
yeah, probably shot that pretty.
Is that where you text Chance as well? So I think you texted him during the race, didn't you?
Yeah, you did.
Oh, I think I did. Saying, oh, that's a good point. Yeah, I think I'd text him saying, it's a good thing you guys are coming out here, because I might have just dropped if I wasn't, expecting you guys to come into town and be there for me. So
yeah,
that's another huge factor. And that was joking and funny at the time, but in all aspects, there was a lot of truth to that, because it kind of held me accountable to sit there and say, hey man, these guys are flying out from Texas. They got their flights already. The last thing I want to do is call and tell them, hey, I DNF, man. I'm done, and yeah, so that was big. So I think I was definitely around that point. And I think it was hard because I was in a bad place, and then my pacer kind of got in a little bit of a bad place with soreness and stuff. So we both literally came limping into Mount Mingus on this, dirt road up top of that mountain. And I guess thinking back, I guess it was a little cold. It definitely was colder with us later on in the race, though, in Munns and stuff in that area. For sure, got a lot colder.
I got you. Well, whenever you got Grace, I guess she swapped out at Mingus, like you said. Was that kind of another little shot of adrenaline for you, and the energy kind of renewed as she came into that race to help you out with pacing?
Yeah, 100%. She always Just like in Moab, it was for the last 70 miles really of that race. And in that particular time, it was perfect. It was perfect time. It was just what I needed. And in this race, it was no different. It was just what I needed. I needed to be around her. I needed to see her more, because you start missing people when you're in a race like this. And just having her with me and getting down Mingus Mountain and watching that sunrise that day, and really coming down a tough part of the course that other people I've seen talking about how bad it was coming down Mingus Mountain, and it was still rocky and just not a fun descent at all. I didn't really notice that. I think I was more focused on just being with her and just having fun and joking around and stuff, um, and then also planning, starting looking forward, looking ahead to what we had ahead of us and stuff, and planning that out. And I planned to I told her, I was like, you just get me down in Jerome and it'll be light. And then from Jerome, I'll just go to Dead Horse by myself. So you can reset, you can go back and get the car. Cause we had my friend and my boss from work kind of switched roles, and she was driving. So they had to drive to Sedona and check in a room and do some stuff with some vehicles and get some stuff set up. And allowed her to do that while from Jerome to Dead Horse. And I definitely missed her in that section, but I'm definitely was a good choice to keep her fresh and give her a little bit of break, because I needed her for the remaining part of that until you guys showed up.
Absolutely, because she grabbed 17 miles there, but if I'm not mistaken, she ended up doing a total of about 70, you said, right?
I think she did like 62. We can kind of do the math once we figure it out. She typically ends up doing at least 62. It seems like that's the 100K. She's the 100K pacer.
100K.
That's awesome. That's a pretty solid pacer if you can get 100K out of them.
Yeah, for sure.
And then, not to mention, you'd mentioned it a couple of times, but kind of wanted to dive into it a little bit more. She's an absolute rock star with that tape, and making sure your feet are getting where you need them to be, and preventing blisters and all that good stuff too. So I don't know how many aid stations we saw her redoing the tape on your feet, but y'all got a system down that's just phenomenal.
Yeah, she's we just kind of, with her volunteering and seeing what other medics do, and then getting a book called Fixing Your Feet and kind of looking at techniques of that, we've just really learned to take care of the feet. And then obviously just seeing where I've gotten blisters in the past with Bigfoot. I had some really deep blisters, and seeing where those were and just kind of pre-taping for it and preparing for them. And she really does a clean job of just really capsulating the toes, and to where there's no creases in the tape or nothing. They just really covered up well, and it definitely helps a lot. Helps a lot to not have beat up feet. But we will talk about that later on, because we did have, right at the end, we did have a little bit of a beat up feet, but that was kind of unexpected and a little frustrating, but we can get into that a little later.
Yeah, no, we're headed that direction for sure. We're gonna hit on that one. And so you ran down the mountain basically from Mingus down to Jerome, and then ended up at Dead Horse. And then did you pick her back up at Dead Horse there, headed toward Deer Park?
Yeah, I did. And Dead Horse was, coming down into, that's a state park, and it was sandy, and they kind of just wind you through this state park, and you end up in a parking lot. And they had some good food there. I devoured 3 full-size Texas tacos, even though that they only wanted to give me 2. I finally was able to talk them into a third one.
You're a big guy. Come on.
Yeah, right.
Oh man. Oh yeah. Only doing 250 miles. I don't need 2 tacos, 3 tacos, right?
But they were Texas tacos. Everything in Texas is big.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, from the little bit we got to see it spin with you at the aid stations, I have no doubt you destroyed the 3 Texas tacos out there.
And then some. I think I ate some other stuff too there for sure. But yeah, from Dead Horse, I we picked back up and headed to Deer Pass, and that was, it was still pretty warm in that section. It was breezy, but it was back to being kind of exposed. It was sandy desert, not much shade. So it just kind of just took it easy through there. I was in and out of feeling good and then not feeling the greatest through there. And then we came into Deer Pass. It had already getting dark and cooling off. I think it was dark for about an hour or so before we came into that aid station. That one says it was 13 miles. That one in particular felt like, to even other people, they said that felt like 17 or 20 miles across there. It seemed like the aid station would never come. And there was other people that kind of followed us in that we kind of woke up, I guess, on the trail when we passed them. They just kind of followed us in, and they said the same thing. They're like, man, it felt like it was never going to end. And I think they were starting to have a little issues with the navigation too, and just being tired. So they kind of picked up on just having a pacer. Anybody that sees a fresh pacer that their head's on a little bit better than them, they kind of, they feed off that. We seen it later on in the race too. And you definitely see that out there. It's kind of that energy draw. Like, man, this guy looks like knows where he's at. He's still fresh.
Yeah. Is that kind of a point in the race where you started really seeing some people get into some of those negative spots? Was that one of the first spots, or did it come a little bit later or earlier?
I mean, I've seen it throughout the whole race, but in that particular place, I think there was a lot of people that I was realizing that were kind of in the same boat that I was, that hadn't slept a lot, that tried to sleep and couldn't sleep. And I got into that aid station, and it was kind of interesting aid station. I think they were the volunteers were having a little bit of booze and stuff, and kind of loud and obnoxious, and in a way, and I wasn't kind of in the mood, but I kind of went with it, and there was kind of some joking conversations there that maybe we could leave off the podcast. It had something to do with being a foot model, but we'll just leave it with that.
I remember that story. That's awesome.
And then I think I tried to sleep there and couldn't, and I just told Grace, I was like, let's just go. And we got on the trail, and I don't even think we were down the trail a half mile, and I said, let's lay down. And she was like, oh, it's going to be too cold, and you're not going to be able to sleep. And I was like, well, even if we could sleep for a little bit, let's just lay down. And we laid down, and I was just holding her, and I think that was big too, because it's just, it's just like being at home at that point. You have somebody there that, you can feel their presence and stuff, and just laid down in the desert, and she had her coat over her legs. And I think it was like 2.5 hours later, we woke up, and I didn't even know where I was at. I was in a big fog. The clouds had rolled in, and actually it started raining. We didn't feel the rain at that time, but shortly down the trail, there were some raindrops, and it was just weird. I had a little bit of trouble waking up. I just wanted to go back to sleep, but that sleep was huge. Really the only big sleep I got during the whole event. And right there, just laying in the sand off the trail. And I remember hearing people walking by, but I was in a deep enough sleep that I was just able just to keep nodding back out. And I remember nudging her one time, telling her she was snoring loud and stuff, because at that point she really wasn't sleeping very much either. So we were both just pretty exhausted.
Man, well, that sounds like it made a world of difference coming out of that section, especially where people were starting to really feel the effects of being 150 miles almost into a 250-mile ultra marathon. Do you know how many hours you were in at that point to the race?
Let's see. Well, we were headed towards Sedona at that point, and we came into Sedona on the sunrise. So that would have been sunrise the third day? Yeah, the third day. Well, yeah, the third day. So you had the sunrise at the beginning, and then the sunrise coming down Mingus, and then the other sunrise coming into Sedona. So yeah,
72-ish hours with running off of pretty much 2.5 hours of sleep the entire time. I know that you said you got that hour up at Mingus. I think it was it Mingus? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think she timed me coming down Mingus. I think I took a 7 minute nap too in the rocks.
There you go. So, man, just minimal sleep through 72 hours. And after that 2 hour nap, I know you said it took you a little bit of while to get back in the swing of things, but did you feel kind of a little bit more fired up or a little bit more aware of everything and moving a little bit better for Sedona?
I definitely felt like that was like the turning point for me to not only just the distance getting closer, you're under 100 miles to the finish, but just having just this refreshed, knowing that you guys are coming, that are going to be fresh, and I'm already thinking ahead of what that's going to mean and how it's going to play out. Just that mental visualization of how it was going to play out with you guys pacing me and her being there was the key for me really to go there. I mean, there were so many factors before where it was like, I might make this, but it doesn't look like I'm going to. It was just, it was just like dropping back to Chad Wright. He did a post about maybe, and that's definitely, there's a lot of truth to that. You're out there and you get to the point where you're like, I maybe make this, I maybe have enough mental strength to get me through this. And there's just so many factors with crew and just timing of things that can make the difference and make and break it. I mean, that's how the degree of separation between the DNF, and this isn't for everybody, but for me, is very fine. I mean, it's sure I could, get over adversity and can say, oh, I'd push through this, I could push through that, and I very well could, but just having people there in those times was absolutely huge, and really, even if I would have made it, I wouldn't have been in as good a mental place as I was, and having the amount of fun I was having really at that point of the race, to go from I'm never doing this again, and honestly looking on ways to get out of KD 225 and some of the other ones I signed up for. So to
Yeah,
really, towards the end of being like, what else is there to do? When's the next one?
absolutely. No, that's awesome. And it's cool to see that mental shift because I just getting that message from you back a couple days into the race out whenever you're at Mingus. I started to get a little worried about you. And then I think, not to jump ahead, but by the time we had gotten there, a couple aid station past where we're at now, I mean, seeing you come in and you seemed like you were pretty eager to go, pretty excited. And that was cool to really grab a hold of that and see it. I mean, we even fed off of that as well. Um, but before we jump into that, coming out of Sedona, you had a pretty good climb headed up to, is it Sleepily?
Yeah, at 179. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that has there's a water crossing and then a pretty big climb, and there was a water station up there. I really didn't use the water station. It clouded up and was windy that day. It was fairly cool. I imagine going up that, and it was a little warmer, I'm sure, for other people, different days or whenever they came through. It could have been hard. That climb wasn't that bad to me. I think I was in a good place, and Grace struggled a little bit on hills, and felt like she was slowing me down, but honestly, she really wasn't, because it was a perfect pace for me to just kind of relax and just do it easy. It was easy on my body. I didn't push myself. I didn't really elevate the heart rate too much, and I think it set me up for later on in the race again too, because I think I could really let my ego get ahead of me right there, and if I was by myself or with somebody faster, and just hammer that hill and really pay for it, because I'm not really thinking clearly at that point in the race, and then I pushed myself real hard up that hill, and I think it could have gone a lot differently there too, because reading some people's reports on that section, that was a hard one for them. They just sound like it was just the climb from hell, and just all kinds of, the water crossing I think that is where I kind of kicked my calluses in, that I'd had. And I think I did get the one heel blister from that water crossing, and that was because the The tape had come off, and I kind of ran out of socks at that point, and I put on a pair of socks that weren't even big enough for me. I actually found some at the water station. It's the reason why I changed out the socks, because there was a pair of small and gingy. So if anybody's listening to this and lost a pair of socks, I have them.
There you go. Oh man.
But yeah, I just kind of put these, and I think the heel was in the wrong place, the heel slot. I think that would contribute definitely to the one callus that I did have, or the blister I had, and also just that river kind of softening up those calluses a little bit, and allowing them to get blisters underneath of them. So
Yeah, absolutely. Man, I can see that. That's lucky that you found that pair of socks though coming out of that hill, even to get your foot some kind of relief, even if it did have kind of a rough spot. Because I know with the sand and all the conditions, it was back and forth probably for a long time out there over the course of that race.
yeah, and I was expecting my socks to dry faster crossing that river, but I think just because it was a little cooler and windy, they didn't really dry as fast as I would have hoped. I don't think it was a contributing factor either way to blisters. Even if I would have took off my shoes and tried to cross the creek, I think I would have still had the same result, because I would have lost my tape, and she didn't have the tape with her, because it wasn't in the car at Sedona when my boss had came, so she didn't have the tape. Normally she would, try to throw the tape in the bag and stuff and kind of be a mobile aid station, but we weren't able to do that. So yeah, into that Schnipply, or however you say that, I don't really remember that aid station, but from there I let her take another break and just told her to get the car cleaned up, that I wanted to try to take a rest before kicking off with you, because I was just planning on just tackling the rest of the race and going. Was my game plan, is to try to get rest there. And you guys came in a little later there, which wasn't a problem. It gave me some time to get off my feet and try to rest. I wasn't really successful in the rest category there as much as I would have really liked to at that point. I don't think at all. I think maybe if I did, it was 10 minutes. I can't remember. I'd have to ask Grace that, but I definitely was the curse of the aid stations. You pull somewhere off away from everybody, and some guy in RV comes up and starts doing construction on his motor home or trailer, freaking with a drill.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah, I remember you telling me that too, and not being able to get sleep because we felt terrible. I had gotten my flight delayed about an hour total, maybe a little bit more than that. So we were expecting to get out there at, I think, in the 8 o'clock hour, and didn't get out till almost 10. So we were feeling really bad about delaying you, but I'm glad it gave you a little bit of time for hopefully a bit of rest and recovery, even if there was a couple of guys out there making all kinds of
Yeah,
wrecks.
I mean, the rest and recovery was huge. I think Grace was able to clean up my feet and dress them pretty good there, and just being able to get off my feet. And my sinuses were tore up at that point. I was, blowing blood out my nose, and was just dry and couldn't breathe, which was contributing to not being able to sleep too. Because once I got in the car, especially, and tried to lay down, my nose was just completely plugged up, and it was between not being able to breathe through your nose and the drainage. It was pretty hard to relax, really.
Yeah, I know. Well, just from us being out there the short time that we were, the dust and the wind were extreme factors in that. Because my nose became stopped up very quickly. So I can't imagine what you went through out there for days in the lower parts where it was really dusty, and in that desert spot with such heavy foot traffic up, and like the bottlenecks in the early stages of the race when everybody was close together. But yeah, we made it out to Munns Park about 10 o'clock, and were able to join you right before the 200-mile mark, I think about 190. And that was cool. We just kind of jumped out the car, grabbed the gear, packed as whatever we could into the bag. Probably went a little light on clothes looking back on that.
Yeah.
But man, we grabbed everything and jumped out and took off. All right, guys, I hate to do it to y'all, but we're going to throw on the brakes right here, and we're going to stop and pick up next week for part 2 of this awesome story of the Cocodona 250 and just generally who Dan Gilliam is. Super excited to share this story with y'all and have the opportunity to just share a fantastic conversation and just give y'all a glimpse into how this guy inspires me every single day with the things that he does. You can find him on Instagram, Big-Footed Ultra Adventures. That's Big-Footed_Ultra Adventures on Instagram. Make sure you check him out. But more importantly, make sure you follow up with this podcast. You're not going to want to miss that next week as we sit down and finish this episode with Dan. Y'all take it easy and always be prepared for whatever is next in line.